recording to the cloud. That looks good. So welcome to the inaugural SIG CLI biweekly meeting of 2022. We have a guest from the release team. Thanks, James, for joining us. I'm gonna make a couple announcements when I could finally get this this window to come up and present the SIG CLI meeting notes. I can't click on this link. Give me a second here. There we go. Okay, so as far as announcements go, I'm going to steal a little bit of James's thunder with the 124 release. I've included the link to the calendar. Let me make sure that is there. And I guess three of the important dates are going to be the production readiness soft freeze is coming up very quickly, actually in about 15 days, a couple weeks. The enhancement freeze, if you have any KEPs, that date is coming up relatively quickly as well. And then of course, we're all going to be really interested in the code freeze, which is at the end of March, on the 29th of March. The enhancement freeze and the code freeze, those are basically end of day on those days. Is there anyone who would like to, who's new or hasn't been here for a while, who'd like to introduce themselves? We might not have a big crowd today. Oh, we got 14. Does anyone want to say hi? If not, I'll move on to.
Hey folks.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. I'm new here. This is my first time in the SIG CLI meeting, and yeah, looking forward to it. I've contributed to the CLI earlier to kubectl. Looking forward to this release.
Well, welcome.
Thank you.
Can you say your name again?
Sorry, completely forgot that. Yeah, I'm Avinash.
Pleasure to meet you.
Likewise. Thank you.
Is there anyone else? Okay, we will move on to our next topic. And the first one is with James saying hi from the 124 release team. Would you like to take it over, James?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is James. I am the Kubernetes 124 release lead from SIG Release. I am, as part of my onboarding, going around every SIG and saying hello. I just want to make sure everyone is aware of the dates, but like you've already got those coming up for the release schedule. The other one to bear in mind is the scheduled release date is presently Tuesday, the 19th of April. So we have a little bit to get us there. Other than that, I just wanted to make myself available to you if you have any questions or comments or queries about the release or about anything that may have changed. I don't think I have any major announcements in that regard, but yeah, just want to say hello, really.
Well, thanks, as I mentioned before, thanks for joining us. I think that there's been, and I'll speak for myself then, I think that there's been, maybe a little friction or we, at least from my end, not keeping these dates in mind, and then if you push these things to the very end, you actually end up for KEPs and for your code right near the code freeze, then things end up being very kind of congested at the wrong times. So if I were going to say anything, it would be, please try to get, don't wait till the last minute for the KEPs and for the code on the code freeze. That's going to make it more difficult for everybody and for the entire release. Cool. So thanks for coming by, James. Is Katrina here?
Yep.
Cool. Do you want to talk about this this item on the kubectl rollout undo not working properly with kubectl apply?
Yeah. So this is one that I stumbled across. It's not particularly new, but we haven't really given it much attention from the looks of it. And it does seem like a legitimate and kind of serious issue with the functionality and usability of kubectl rollout undo. Essentially what is happening, as far as I can tell, is that the last applied annotation is excluded from the changes that are synced back to the deployment because they're never synced to the replica set in the first place. So what a rollout undo does is essentially look at the older replica set that we want to restore, take its spec, pod spec, and put it back in the deployment to create a new revision that looks like the old revision, effectively activating that old replica set, right? But that means that the last applied annotation no longer matches up with the spec. The last applied annotation continues to reflect what actually happened last time, but the spec that we have is from an older version. So what can happen is if there was a change in field management between the apply that created the older replica set and the apply that created the last one, the subsequent apply is going to do the wrong thing, essentially, because it is potentially unaware of fields that were managed by apply because its annotation is incorrect. So the apply annotation is, according to the history that I dug up, being deliberately excluded from the sync down to the replica set and then during the rollback back to the deployment, because it has other implications, right? It's not just a piece of data. It is also telling kubectl that this was managed by apply, which is not true of the replica set. The replica set was not created by apply, so you don't want it on there. So I thought this was a really interesting one and wanted to discuss with the group what we think we can do about it. And my impression is that this is something that we could fix behaviorally. Like, it is strictly a bug. It's not something that someone would be using successfully. But I was looking to get some opinions on my understanding of the problem and possible solutions.
So as you mentioned, the last applied annotation is meant to keep the intent of the applier. And when you, at the very least, or what it's going to do is allow us to prune fields. It's going to basically say, these are the fields that I care about when I apply. And then if one of those fields is missing, when you subsequently apply, you know that you can actually remove those fields. I think that was we weren't able to actually delete fields or prune fields without this last applied annotation. But as you mentioned, yeah, the rollout is kind of a separate, that's a separate command to kubectl apply. And yeah, this kubectl apply is going to say, I care about these fields. These are the fields that I care about. And I'm not sure off the top of my head why that would connect to the rollout.
Yeah, I think it's because the rollout changes the pod spec in the template and does not change, because the data is not preserved anywhere, the corresponding last applied config annotation, which means that it's desynchronized, and the field tracking, if any field management changed between the two versions in question, the field tracking gets messed up because apply did create that one field, say the field that was different. It did create it, but we've lost the record of the fact that it created that. So subsequent changes might have the wrong behavior because we now think that apply didn't manage the field in question.
Okay, I see where you're going. I'm going to assign myself on this, if that's okay. If I'm logged in, I'm not. Oh yeah, I'll assign myself in a minute.
Yeah, applying the old config is for sure an option, but that would mean that this command has no, I'm sorry, I'm talking about the chat. Antoine says we should recommend to apply the old config rather than use undo. But the fact is that undo is a command that we are providing, and it is buggy in combination with apply right now. So if we thought that we should never use it, then we should remove it. But I can understand that there are cases where the old state might be difficult to reproduce, or apply might take too long in like really at scale setups, and undo could be undo basically reactivates an old replica set that already exists, which could be a lot more expedient in an emergency response situation. And that's exactly where you want your tooling to not be buggy. So I'm very empathetic with the problem here.
Okay, I'll also include Antoine's comment as one of the ways to get around this problem, whether or not we actually address it. We can look at that. I'm sure we're not going to solve that right now.
Do we think we can't or shouldn't solve this though? Just saying don't use this command that we are going to continue to provide is maybe not the best and most discoverable advice, right? Like people are going to see it exists and think it does a thing, and if we can fix it, shouldn't we?
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, yeah, I want to actually dig into this a little bit longer before it may actually be that we recommend that these two don't, that this may be of course the best solution is server-side apply, right? So server-side apply is, instead of the client-side apply, which has this last applied annotation, it says last applied configuration. I think it's last applied annotation. That is much better at, as Antoine knows, at saying what particular fields I care about as an applier, whereas this last applied annotation is very difficult to combine with multiple appliers, and to figure out what the intent is on who owns what field. And
yeah, I don't think server-side, maybe Anton can correct me if I'm wrong about this, but I think server-side would have the exact same bug in terms of the specific apply actor, like that server-side apply would also be tracking, but in a different way.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
Yeah, it would still get desynced.
Yeah.
I think. Oh, go ahead, Antoine.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think I agree with Paco on the thread that this is the behavior I would expect. An undo does not modify an apply, right? Like the purpose of the last applied is to show the actual last applied configuration. The user, by undoing a rollout, is modifying the spec. It's not applying the spec.
yeah, it's not saying which particular fields the applier cares about.
Yeah, I don't know if I agree with that.
I don't agree with that. I think that the user intent and rolling a rollback is to roll back to the previous state of the deployment. And the fact that the last applied config, the tracking of who owns what field, happens to be in metadata and not a spec is a detail that the user does not know about. On average, they have no idea how that works.
Yeah, but if the user wants to update the last applied, they should reapply the old config.
They don't want to update the last applied. They're not thinking about that in this moment. What they want to do is roll back, right? They want to roll back the deployment. That's the intent expressed by kube control rollout undo. And the fact is that they're using apply to manage it otherwise, and we're not rolling back a very important part to them of the deploy, unlike what we're implying.
Well, you just said what I agree with, in that they want to roll out the last deployment, right? They want to undo the deployment. That is not the last applied configuration to the resource.
That's an important part of the previous state.
You're playing with the words. I mean, what the user wanted to do is to go back to what it was before.
Yeah, and I understand that, but to me, that last applied is the last thing that was applied to this resource, right? Like anything that we go and modify and change, last applied should be that source of truth, right? Like it is the actual last applied configuration. So to me, the rollout is a quick, let's swap the spec to point back to the old replica set. That's not a apply, right? Because so the whole point of the undo is it's not a declarative change, right? It's imperative, right? You're imperatively rolling back. If you want to declaratively change the state of the resource, you change the manifest and reapply the manifest.
Yep.
So I think we're going to be split on that one. We may need Mache for the tiebreaker there.
Yeah, I don't know if it matters. I think we're trying to avoid the painful part of this, which is how do we fix that? Can we fix it? Is the question, I think. Katrina, do you know?
Like, do I know if it's possible? Like, is there some approach we could take? The only thing that occurred to me off the top of my head, like the problem is that we're losing the record of what last applied looked like. And when I looked into the code, we're actually deliberately excluding that annotation. And the history indicated that it was for the reason of not implying that the replica set had been applied, which is very valid. But I guess a somewhat hacky, like top of the just mind idea that springs up is that we could sync it just with a different name.
Yeah.
And then that would preserve it on the replica set, and that would allow us to sync it back.
So it would be an annotation specifically so that we could undo it and get our last applied configuration, last applied annotation.
Yeah, and we're already doing that for most annotations. If you look at the code, we're taking the annotations, like when you create a replica set, you take the annotations from the deployment, you sync them down, and then when you do the restore, you sync them back. And there's like this specific hard-coded list of ones that are excluded from that, including the applied annotation in this case, because we don't want to imply that the replica set was applied. But if we swap the name and then do sync it, and just make sure that the name gets corrected when it goes back and forth, I think that would work off the top of my head.
Yeah, I agree. Does it have any implication on like the size of the object or something?
Oh, for sure, because those annotations are enormous, especially the server-side version. Whether or not that's acceptable is another question.
Oh, we would have to do that for server-side too. That's kind of terrible.
But it would only be for rollouts, right? It would only even, we could. Yeah, I guess once you apply that extra annotation, it'd be like, how would you clean it up? It would be available for the undo. If the undo didn't happen, then it's still going to be stuck around.
Yeah, you would need to do it unconditionally. Like you don't know in advance if someone's going to try to use roll it undo. So the data would just have to be available all the time.
Although for the next apply, you could clear it out. So for any apply, you could clear out that extra annotation. Anyway, yeah, I don't think we're gonna solve that here, but this was so Katrina, if you could, or Antoine or myself, let's make sure that we capture some of this here in this issue, some of the items that we've just discussed, since we made some progress there. Whether or not we do this, to be honest, I'm not willing to, I wouldn't want to make a decision here off the cuff, but I think we've at least uncovered some of the relevant context. Does anybody else think we should answer that right now? Or maybe we could push it till the next meeting and say, hey, we got 2 weeks to think about this, and then we'll make a decision next meeting. Does that sound reasonable, Katrina?
Yeah, I can add a comment with some context to the issue, and I agree with what Anto just said in the sidebar there, that it's going to be a matter of weighing the trade-off of the solution. It's not going to be a cheap and easy solution. So yeah, that's why I also wanted to bring it to the group for a synchronous discussion, because I don't think it's straightforward.
Yeah, I definitely want to get Mache's take, because again, to me, we've had this struggle of like how we intend Kubernetes to be used by users and how they actually use it, right? And like same thing when we talked about last applied last time, right? Like the git diff of your, the diff of your last applied to the current state of your resource should be a git diff, right? We shouldn't be like changing the resource out from underneath itself. And to me, that the rollout undo, the original semantic meaning of that command was just to change the deployment, right? Like last applied was added how many releases ago? 2 or 3 or 3? I think 3. And it had a very specific meaning of like, this is the actual last applied configuration.
Oh, that's been around for years.
Yeah, last applied is super old. That it
Really?
probably goes just as far as rollout, which is also very old.
Okay.
But the last applied, are we talking about the last applied configuration, that annotation?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's been around for years.
Okay.
That's always driven apply as far as I know, which is
Yes.
pretty fundamental. Like it was in 1.5 and probably
least.
earlier.
Well, then we'll need more context, right? Because if that was the intended behavior, that should have been added originally.
I think there's potentially an oversight, which is why I think we should consider fixing it. It's a complex interaction between these two commands. And I think it does matter what the user thinks is going to happen. Maybe the conclusion here will be, this is too expensive. We will cause more trouble for folks in solving it than we will improve their lives, in which case the outcome could be that we print some sort of warning explanation every single time somebody runs kube control rollout undo about like, if we could do it conditionally, actually, if they run rollout undo on a resource that was managed by apply, we could print some explanation to make sure that they are aware, and the moment that they've actually done this, what is going to happen and what they need to do to safely move forward from the point that they have now put themselves in. So I think putting in the docs that this command is not recommended, like, I don't think that's going to actually help people.
If I do a kube control edit, change the image version and let that go and save, I can undo that, right? I'm pretty sure rollout undo will work with that manual edit to the resource. I can go test that, but I'm pretty sure it's going to work. And so that's
because it's not particularly aware of the change cause. It's just going to revert the revision.
Right.
So we're going to, so apply is more important than rollout. Just as more context. Rollout is an imperative command, whereas we suggest declarative applies. And yeah, I think that these two don't work together well because of the different models, the imperative versus declarative. But if it comes down to, doing well of one versus the other, clearly the client side apply is going to take the cake. It's going to win. Right,
for sure. And I don't think the fix would actually interfere in any way with the apply functionality. It would just have some downsides in terms of like what Anton called it in terms of storage. Yeah.
Okay.
And yeah, I agree with the imperative and declarative thing, and that we do have that struggle in a lot of our tools, making sure that other people or that all of our users understand how things work and what the recommended workflows are versus the full spectrum of possibilities that we're exposing.
So I haven't looked in the rollout code recently, but when I did a couple of years ago, it was pretty crufty and pretty ugly as well, just as a little bit more context. It might have actually been worked on by the SIG apps team. I think that there were some SIG apps people who actually had worked on that. Anyway.
I think that's good enough for today. Thanks for the discussion.
Cool, thanks for bringing that one up. Okay, Eddie. we're on to the kuberc proposal discussion.
So I was really hoping Mache would be here. So I'll give a brief thing and then maybe we can punt this, or I could talk to Mache separately too. So we've been saying for a while that we want to do this kuberc type thing where we want to separate user configs out from server and cluster configs. And with that, that lets us change preferences for the user and let them have their own, configuration that is not tied to their cluster authentication. Mo sees this as an opportunity for us to opt users into new default behavior. So if we version this kuberc file and users opt into using it, right? And we can version out behaviors or defaults or some sort of settings that we can configure with this file. Example that I've been using is obviously like delete confirmation, right? If a kuberc exists and you're using version 1, we can opt users into delete confirmation by default. Mo wants to be able to allow list auth providers by default. So if your auth provider is not listed on the allow list in your kuberc, it will error if your kube config for your cluster is using an auth provider that's not allow listed, right? So these are different behaviors that we can opt the user into if they are using this new file and the version and whatnot. That's obviously breaking changes for some existing behaviors. And one of the things that we've been talking about is how do we make changes that we all agree if we could do over, we would do differently, but we can't because we don't want to break users' existing behaviors and workflows. So I'll stop there. Any thoughts on that type of thing? Like if this file is existing and a user is opting in to use it, we can change default behaviors on them.
Is there a link, Eddie, that I could bring up a proposal?
I have a bunch of notes written up, but no, nothing formal yet. I wanted to get this group's take before I submitted something. So this is a separation. So the kuberc is something that we still want to do. So users can change and they can opt into the behavior declaratively. They can say, oh yes, I want delete confirmation. What I want to discuss is the thought of opting users into new default behaviors if they are using this type of file. So we can change the defaults.
I guess kind of an intermediate way of doing that could be that we could generate the file for them as part of the opt-in process and have it generate the different defaults that we want. So they are still doing each one explicitly and we're not like implicitly changing behavior just because the file exists. I think I would prefer that. Especially for things that would be like a major global change that might be confusing, like the auth example that you mentioned, that would potentially make none of their key configs suddenly work or something like that.
Yeah, that's a good thought.
So I really like the idea of a kuberc file giving users the ability to change behaviors instead of having to add extra flags. And to giving users more control over how their kube control works. I really like the idea.
Yeah, I should have led with that as well. I also really like the idea of having this file and giving the users ability to do that, and also kind of separating out that cluster config layer from the user preferences layer. I think that makes a lot of sense and will open up a lot of doors for us to fix some things via opt-in that we really wish we could fix, as you were saying.
Yeah, I agree. And I I'm still, I don't know where I land. Mo is very much for this. I like the idea of fixing some things that we all agree is like I said, if we could do it from start today, we would do it differently. So I do like that idea to kind of like course correct on some of the decisions we made a while ago that our hands have been tied on. And I'm not sure if the defaulting to that behavior is the right approach or not.
So if we try to go forward with this and it in any way changes, if in any way this causes any kind of major change in the default behavior, then we're going to have problems. So if this file is only for those who actually want to change behavior, and so they're the ones who actually have this file, then that's going to probably be a lot easier to sell to the community than if we force everyone to have this file, and then we have to worry about defaults for everything, because if anybody's scripts or anybody's interaction is going to be surprise them, then there's going to be pushback, major pushback. So I'm imagining this as something that's optional for people who know about this kuberc file, and that we can, they would be able to modify the behavior of their kube control because they know about this kuberc file and because they've included it. But we can't force everybody to use this. Otherwise, we have to figure out defaults that would work for everybody, which I think would be impossible.
So it's not forcing the file on people. If people opt into using the file,
Right.
So we're not going to create the file for them by any automatic means, right? If we generate one, that's a different story, but it's not like you're going to run kube control 124 and get this file created if it doesn't exist.
Right.
The thought is that if you opt into creating and using this file, then we can change the default behaviors for some things. If you want the old behavior, you can declare it in the file that you've already opted into using. That's the thought.
I think that's more. Go ahead.
Are you thinking it would be implicit just by the existence of the file, or that the file would have the new defaults in it?
The existence of the file in the version that's declared in it, yes.
I think that might be confusing.
Yeah,
I would prefer something more explicit.
Yeah.
And the customize has kind of a interesting command where it has like a fixed command. Basically, we could do something analogous if we wanted to generate good defaults and be able to evolve them over time, where you have like a update my user config to the latest best practices thing. If we're concerned about stagnating at that new layer as well.
So Eddie, what do you think? What would we like to get done today with this? You just wanted to get some feedback on where to move forward on this.
Yeah, we're definitely moving ahead with the kuberc file in general. I just wanted to get the temperature of everyone, where if, again, files completely opt in to use, but opting in changes default behavior that you can swap back to if you prefer. And the idea Mo was having was, by versioning this file, we can continue to change default behavior with different versions. So version 2 defaults, we could say, oh, this was a choice that we regret, and now we want to make this the default. So if you're using version 2, you get a new set of defaults. I agree, it's definitely confusing.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, if we got kubectl versions, and then we also have the RC versions that, and you have to have this matrix of these two. I mean, I could imagine that being problematic.
Yeah.
I was imagining something far simpler, just like, here's a couple of things that I want to be Sean's version of kube control default behavior on, you know, things that we'd be able to change. And even those, there's not going to be that many fields I'm imagining that we would change. Not too much behavior we would change. Like maybe the delete, you know, obviously the delete is the initial one. Mo's thinking of auth functionality. I think the initial, I would imagine that the initial version of this, that's the wrong word, the initial pass at this does not version it. That to me feels like trying to do too much too soon, creating complications that aren't, that are gonna sink this proposal.
I don't know about that. Like, I feel like it should contain a schematized object, and like KRM style object that would implicitly need a version. Just preparing for the eventuality that we do want to change the structure of what we have in there. I think that that's actually just an important feature of a config file. So I do think we should have a version.
No, I agree. It's definitely really confusing, and I see the problems in the future for sure. And I'm sure that's going to be the biggest piece of pushback, is the confusion. The idea of generating it with our preferred defaults isn't a bad idea. That's definitely a good approach, Katrina.
So the kube config file, we haven't versioned that, have we?
It is. We've never touched a version, but there is in the type a version declared.
Okay.
Pretty sure. Let me see.
I've never remembered actually having to worry about versioning.
Yeah, it has an API version, yes. It is API v1 kind config.
Okay. So if that's the case, then I think that Katrina's right that you know, versioning the schema certainly is it's consistent and makes sense. Hopefully, it wouldn't make it too cumbersome to actually be usable and too confusing.
Yeah, and Antoine dropped a bunch of good points in the chat too. I saved that so I can send it to Mo.
Another thing is that like we should start it off with an alpha version, and you'll see right in the file there that it's alpha, which will give us a opportunity to follow the standard rollout process for features and see how it goes. And if we find it super confusing, then we can get rid of it again.
Yeah, and kubeconfig does have a preferences field as a top level key. It's just we've never done anything with it. And again, that's the problem with tying your client configuration to your cluster credentials. So that's a change that we want to make for sure. Cool. Okay, this is good feedback. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, cool. So let's move on to the stand-ups. Does anybody want to stand up?
I can do stand up for customize real quick.
Okay, I'll try to dictate.
So we're working on a rework of the roadmap for 2022. And essentially what we're trying to focus on is setting priorities so that folks can understand what we see as the most important issues and the most important projects for the future of Kustomize that we want to work on this year and prioritize. So among other things, if folks want to get involved, they can easily discover what's important to us and what we'll see as a priority in terms of supporting contributor growth and review bandwidth. So as part of that, we will definitely come and present what we have at probably the next SIG CLI meeting. And we would like to invite folks who use Kustomize or work on Kustomize to flag anything that they think should be on there as a priority that we might not have included in the initial version. So we'll bring that at the next meeting. We're working on it right now, but feel free to reach out to us on Slack. If you have something that you think should be in there, we can get it on there from the beginning. So that's the main thing for me. Natasha's here as well. Natasha, do you have anything to bring up?
No, just the roadmap. Thanks.
So when you say the next meeting, you're talking the SIG CLI biweekly meeting, or
Yes.
Okay. Cool. So are there any other stand-ups? Maybe, or is anyone from CUI here? Do we have
Me again,
updates?
sorry. I wanted to flag something else.
Sure. Sorry about that. I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, you didn't. I totally spaced that. I also wanted to say this. So there's a brand new sub-project that we're just kicking off called the
Right.
KRM Functions sub-project. And our very first sub-project meeting is today at 1:30 Eastern. So in 45 minutes. And if you're interested in KRM functions, whether you're using them through Kustomize or Kept or anything, please come join us. The meeting is in the official calendar as well as on the SIG overview page in the community repo. So yeah, it's a recurring meeting and we'd like to welcome folks to come join us in that.
Yes, I saw that. I got notifications of that.
I have a quick one. We need to, so I do a lot of work with the SIG-K, it's infra group as well. And one of the big things we're planning is the migration of the, so the current PROW cluster, all of our PROW jobs, all that is run on a Google employee-owned GCP account that the community does not have access to if they do not work at GCP. At Google. And one of the bits that the purpose of that SIG is to migrate our builds and test jobs to a new community-owned PROW cluster. And so part of that, all the SIGs are going to be tasked with updating and moving and figuring out which of their jobs actually make sense to run when still. So kind of like a test audit, that's what I'm getting at. So if anyone is interested in auditing our tests and figuring out how all of that works, let me know on Slack or in the SIG CLI channel, because we got a lot of tests that run, and there's a lot of them. Some are flaky, some aren't. So we should just really do a general test audit.
Cool. Thanks for bringing that up, Eddie. There was actually a time for the SIG CLI when we had our own test grid that we had an on-call to try to fix the test. That kind of actually fell through the cracks after a while. That was a long time ago.
Marcus just dropped in a PR.
Hey, so there was an issue opened at some point that was asking to be able to set parts of the kube config using the set subcommand. And I went and opened a PR to fix it. And then like an hour later realized that there's like a whole other subcommand that does the thing that I just made. But the issue was triage. I just wanted to ask, like, should I just change my pull request so that the error doesn't spit out something that doesn't make any sense to the user and points to the new subcommand? or sorry, not the new, but to the existing subcommand, or I don't know. I guess it's, we don't have to figure it out now, but I just wanted to see if I could get some feedback on whether we should do that, or if like having this be done by the set subcommand is desirable.
So I'm going to try to bring that up.
There was an issue a few weeks ago. Trying to dig it up.
Hold on, let me grab it for you.
The set command does not work with a bunch of stuff. So you can't set into a map, you can't set into an array. Is that what your PR adds?
So this is really specifically just for the auth provider, which is settable using the set-credentials subcommand, but not obviously not using the set and then the path notation. And so I added that in. You're right, it also doesn't work for the exec config. However, that again is also settable by the set-credentials subcommand. So the PR that I made only fixes the auth provider but also updates the errors on what was I just talking about? Also updates the errors if they try to pass in an exec config or not.
So I just linked to the issue that I was thinking of. Set doesn't work. This user wanted to work on the auth info structure as well with impersonate and all those other bits as group. Going into a map or a slice doesn't work. So absolutely, if you want to take a look at that issue, I point out a couple other things, but yeah, we would absolutely take a PR that brings set up to working with all those bits. It just, set was very old and definitely needs some love.
I noticed. Okay. Yeah, I only did the one. I don't know. The code is probably not that great. But yeah, I was planning on adding subsequent PRs for like exec config and things like that.
I don't know if it's this issue or if there's yet another one, but I also remember one where we had a bunch of users asking us to add specific flags to support fields, and our answer was that we didn't want to do that. We would rather extend set. So +1 to that.
Yeah, that was the one I just linked. Good memory. Cool. I just assigned myself to the PR, take a look at it. But Marcus, we can talk offline too if you want. If you want to get all that into working order, that would be much appreciated for sure.
Okay. Yeah, we can talk offline. Thanks.
Great, thanks for bringing that up, Marcus. I think we're right near the end. I put a couple of links one to the PR and one to the issue. Does that sound reasonable, Marcus, Eddie, Katrina? I put those in the notes for future reference.
Eddie linked another issue as well. 1106. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, let's put that in there as well. If I could get back to the chat. Okay, if we don't have anything else, we could close. Does anybody have anything before we close? We'll give everybody a couple minutes early. Okay, great. Thanks for dropping by. Thanks for joining us to start off 2022. We got a good year ahead of us, looks like. Okay, we'll see you guys later. Okay, let me stop the recording. Do you want to stop?